Hello, PreSales Collective. It's your host, James Kaikis. I hope you're having a nice day and want to say thank you again for following our podcast. In today's episode titled The 3+1 Rules of SE Leadership, I am joined by the famous John Care. John Care is one of the pioneers of pre-sales, having started in 1984, and he's been wildly influential with his books and his trainings in the last 25 years. John and I have a great conversation about his entering the field. We lightly talk about how the industry has changed and where we think it's going to go. And then we really spend a lot of time talking through leadership concepts. I enjoyed today's episode. I took a bunch of notes myself. And this episode is really catered toward anyone who wants to get into leadership and definitely to those that are in leadership. So thanks for listening and enjoy. Hey, John Care. Good morning.
Good morning, James. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I'm doing fantastic, actually. No real complaints.
It is a crazy time right now, especially in our country for sure.
It is, but I'm thankful I still have a job. I've managed to lose some weight while I've been locked down, which I think is the reverse of most people who are baking bread. I get to walk on the beach, listen to wonderful podcasts like yours. So,
saying all the right things to start, John. You're saying all the right things to start.
I'm doing my best. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah, appreciate that. One of the things we've kind of asked everybody to start the podcast is how is your business managed during the pandemic?
So it's certainly been interesting from somebody who typically travels, 150, 175,000 miles a year, flitting around the world doing, sales kickoffs and keynotes and everything. I've come to a grinding halt. And my wife comes with me in most of those travels. So the same's happened to her. So we're readjusting literally to living together in the same place now for 3 months.
Yeah.
Not getting out and traveling that much. So that's been an adjustment personally, but we're doing great. Unlike most of my clients, we have no kids running around the house to distract us. So that's pretty good. Business side, after about a 4 or 5 week pause towards the end of March and the start of April, business is just lit up for us. It's astonishing. And actually, one of the weeks in May was the busiest week we have ever had in my company in the 15 years it's been in existence.
Wow. Congratulations.
That's humbling too. I think we delivered 21 workshops in 5 different languages in a single week.
That's great to hear that you've had a massive May. That's fantastic. How has business changed from country to country? That's what I'm definitely interested in.
So I think a lot of companies have taken the opportunity to say, we have most of our sales engineers, to use the generic term, sitting at home. Activity is not what it was. Let's get them trained up, both technically, personally, and professionally. Now, it's varied a little bit. So we're seeing a pretty good mix of business across the 3 major regions. The US certainly seems to be kind of ahead of the pack. I should say the Americas is somewhat ahead of the pack. APAC is really kind of going strong as well in terms of business. And the last 2 or 3 weeks, kind of EMEA has woken up. I think people are realizing that maybe they're not going to have all their summer vacations that they usually do. So we're starting to get bookings there as well. So it's been relatively uniform. Again, that's good. It's a good balance.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Has the content been different in this busy May, right? Like, are you putting out different type of content during the pandemic versus what you did from a workshop-wise prior?
Yes, we are. And we were somewhat fortunate about that. At the end of last year, I made a decision to heavily invest in virtualizing our content because probably 80% of our serendipity. It was a lucky accident. Who knew? And so by the time mid-March came around, we were well on the way to getting our 4 or 5 top-selling classes in a fully virtual content. I mean, we'd always deliver them virtually, but we'd never really specialized them that way. So we've taken our basic classes, stripped out a lot of the noise, extraneous things. Most of our workshops are now 4 90-minute modules. We deliver 2 modules on one day and 2 modules on another day. It's far more focused. We've learned how to fully utilize subrooms and breakouts and things like that.
Big deal. It's a change.
It is. And we've had to adjust to maybe 8 different virtual transmission mechanisms. I mean, we have Teams, we have Google Meet, I mean, you name it. So now my facilitators are really getting a crash course in all the different virtual learning mechanisms.
I bet. Well, that's good to hear. Congratulations on your success and glad to hear that it's continual and things are going well for you guys. One of the things we talk about at the PreSales Collective is your story. So understanding how you got into pre-sales. In the beginning, I'd let people know if you are in pre-sales and you haven't heard of John Care, I'd be a little bit surprised. So Tell us how long you've been in pre-sales and really how did you get into this career?
I feel I should start this story with once upon a time. So I actually graduated as a chemical engineer, and I spent the first 5 years of my work life crawling around an oil refinery in the south of England. I worked for Esso, the British affiliate of Exxon. I was always a more computer-savvy, technical-aware engineer rather than someone who ran around with a slide rule. And we had a vendor come in trying to sell us the productivity software and engineering software. I discovered wow, this is amazing stuff. And I kind of picked up their story, and I was really their inside salesperson throughout the refinery, to the point where the VP of sales from this company pulled me aside and said, hey, listen, you want a job doing this? You're great at explaining really technical things to non-technical people. And I thought, I'm a good engineer. I'm never going to be a world-class engineer, but I think this is a different skill. My wife, Alison, is American. We've been living over in the UK for a while. She wanted to come back home. And so I said, yes, I'll take a job with you, but only in your corporate headquarters, which is in Princeton, New Jersey. So July 1984, I turn up, I meet my new boss, who I've spoken to on the phone, and I'm now a solution consultant, is what they called me.
Wow.
Yes, and that was back in the days of 35 millimeter slide decks and overhead transparencies, and we didn't really even have portable computers. So it was all IBM mainframes.
A lot different.
You could say that. So then I progressed through the ranks, everything from an individual contributor, as I like to say, up at 4:00 in the morning trying to get my demo to work, right? When the rep is in the room next to me fast asleep, to being a VP of a pre-sales organization of hundreds of people. And then a while back, 20 years ago now, I just got frustrated sitting in a sales training meeting. We were doing solution selling for the 5th time, and my brain was numb. And I just turned to a lady who was working for me and said, why are we here? It's 5 days of training. Only a day and a half of it is relevant to us, and we can absorb it 3 times faster than all these salespeople around us. And she looked at me and said, if you're so smart, when you write a book about it? And that, believe it or not, is the genesis of Mastering Technical Sales. That was it. And I went out, and Aaron Bolig, who was my co-author on the first set of books, came up to me and said, me too. We went to a bar in Truckee, on the border of California and Nevada, and hammered out how we're going to write the book.
That's unbelievable.
And then the business has grown over 20 years from that. So that's the genesis story.
I love hearing that. I had no idea that was the story. That's great.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny how something small sparks the light bulb? And I mean, look where you've gone in the last 15 years because of that comment.
Yeah. Who knew? I mean, the book started out of frustration. Because you could go to sales training, you could go to back then Toastmasters, and there was really nothing else. And no one had written a manual for how to be a pre-sales engineer. So I wrote it. I didn't expect it to turn into a business. I just wrote it because I love writing.
A question that comes to my mind is, how has the industry changed since 1984?
Oh.
I know.
It's George Orwellian right there. Well, massively. I mean, the technology obviously has changed dramatically. I mean, we used to do installs and throw 9-inch mag tapes in the back of the car and turn up at a data center and beg the systems programmer to let us do weird things to his or her mainframe. Now you just light something up in the cloud and away you go. However, I would say that the job has changed dramatically, particularly over the last 20 years. More so even over the last 5. We ran a survey a while back, and we asked somewhere close to 2,000 senior execs, what is it you expect from pre-sales engineers? And number 1 was somebody who understands my business. That's fair enough. Number 2 was someone who can design innovative solutions with my staff. Number 3 was somebody who can clearly and effectively communicate with me. Number 4 was somebody who I can trust to do the right thing for me and my company. And number 5 was someone who has deep technical knowledge. So deep technical knowledge is now, to use poker terminology, table stakes, right? 20 years ago, in the heart of the dot-com explosion, deep technical knowledge was it. If you and SE had deep technical knowledge and could basically stand up and, tie your shoes, you had a job. Now the job has all these consultative things layered on top of it, yet the role of the sales rep has barely changed over 20 years, but the role of the SE has changed dramatically. And think about the last 5. right? So now everything is as a service. It's no longer honking great big your annual deals. It's monthly recurring revenue. So the barrier to entry is smaller. The barrier to exit is smaller. It's more so about customer relationships and retention. There's all these other social selling relationship skills that are layered on top of it. Basically, does the technology work and how do you show it?
I love hearing your perspective because I feel like we probably can talk for an hour on what's changed in the last 5 years and what's going to change in the next 5 to 10. I have a lot of opinions here. This is really kind of the core of why we started the PreSales Collective, to ensure that our profession continues to have a voice and a seat at the table, because we are more and more important in technology sales than ever.
I totally agree with that. Now, obviously, James, you and I are biased because we have a vested interest, right? We have a dog in this fight, as it were.
One question before we get into our major theme, which is the 3+1 rules of SE leadership. Do you know where the pre-sale rules started? I like to tell a little fable around it, but do you have more of an origin story?
There are many, many origin stories. The one I like is that once upon a time, there was a IBM sales rep who was trying to make a sale to a very, very technical company. Actually, I think it was to a university, and he needed help. So he wandered the halls of Armonk, corporate headquarters of IBM, until he found somebody who would actually look him in the eye. And then he grabbed that person, said, put on a suit, I'm taking you out. And they were now the first sales engineer. So that's my understanding about how it started. I don't know if that's true. It's over 50 years ago.
All right, John. Well, let's talk about today's topic, the 3+1 rules of SE leadership. Personally, as a leader, I'm really excited for this section as well and hearing your perspective. But before we kind of get into it, I would like to know, what is your definition of leadership?
Oh, wow. Well, so the self-serving answer is somebody who follows the 3+1 rules that we outline in the book. That's a little circular. I think leadership has the strategic part to it in that you lead somewhere and your people are following them. So you're not pushing them. They kind of naturally follow you. So you are out in front. And I'd say a really good leader does both leading and managing. Now, you see all these memes all over the internet and on LinkedIn that kind of make fun of management and say leadership is everything. And maybe it's a little controversial. I don't necessarily believe that. I just finished up a book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott. Yep. And in it, she tells a story about how the analogy is that leadership and management is really like playing tennis. One is your forehand and one is your backhand. And you need both in order to be a world-class tennis player. Now, the Roger Federers of the world have an absolutely amazing backhand, but you give him an easy shot on his forehand and he's just going to hammer it past you. So same thing kind of applies. I think everyone needs a balance between leadership and management. And management is tactical. Management is getting things done. Management is really oversight. And leadership is the more longer term, kind of a little bit more of the squishy, touchy-feely stuff that goes into it. And sometimes as engineers, that's what we have a hard time with because it's squishy and you can't define it.
I really do like the tennis analogy. That is good because you're right. Management gets a bad kind of rap at times, but it is needed to effectively move and motivate teams, and just to manage your people. I actually have one of these things, maybe the difference in my perspective with leadership is I don't always feel like you need a title to have leadership. And I think people struggle with that. They're like, I want to take my next step in my career. I want to be a manager so I can lead. But you don't need that title to be a leader. And I think that's just the one difference from my perspective. And you might be able to argue that you don't need it to be able to manage people effectively. But to be a real leader, again, you don't need the title. It really is a different perspective from my opinion.
I would totally agree with that. It certainly does help in some cultures to have the title to be a manager as well. In the book, we reference a survey we did. We interviewed thousands of SEs. We asked them what they wanted to do over the next 30 months. And close to 40% of them said, I want to become a manager. And then when you drill down and ask them why, you get the response along the lines of, well, it's kind of what we're supposed to do. That we do know how hard it is. But an almost equal proportion want to become a better sales engineer and progress up the individual contributor ranks, and become the senior SE, the master SE, master principal, and all the other weird and wonderful titles we have in the top ranks. And that's okay too. And then you have a portion who want to go into sales. But I think first-line SE leadership is actually one of the hardest jobs in the company. Because there's so much you have to do, and you're accountable and responsible for so much, but you don't have that much power to get it done. smallest of companies.
Smaller companies, a little bit more, right?
Yes.
Being an SC for your entire career is okay. And I think a lot of people feel societal pressures that they're supposed to go to management, but you can be a great individual contributor and a terrible manager. And you can be a terrible individual contributor, but a great manager. And I think people sometimes think that because they're a great individual contributor, they can take that next step. But my advice for everybody, when you want to get into management, it's not about you anymore. You got to check your ego at the door. It's not about you. I think people have a hard time getting through that. I personally did too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a fabulous book out there written by Marshall Goldsmith, which I recommend to everybody, called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it talks about how what made you successful to get into your current position, you have to leave a lot of that behind in order to progress forwards. And particularly a lot of SEs forget that, and they just try and make everyone be like themselves. And that's not necessarily the way you want to go. So I highly recommend that book to anybody who is in management or wants to get into management. It was an eye-opener for me when I read it.
Yeah, and I'll double down on that perspective. Michael Watkins, who wrote the first 90, talks about that as well. He talks about what got you this current job is not going to make you successful in your next one. So you have to adapt, you have to adjust for sure. Well, let's talk about the 3+1 rules of SE leadership. So, John, why don't you tell us a little bit more about this concept?
Sure. Well, we're on audio, so you can't actually see the prop I'm holding up of the book. First of all, I have to give credit. So the original format of the 3+1 rules was actually developed by a fellow called Jack Fine. Jack and I worked together at HP, like 15 years ago. So Jack was the one who kind of first had this idea. And then Chris Daly, my co-author, and I picked it up and ran with it. So kudos to Jack for that. The 3 rules are, rule number 1 is develop and serve your people. Rule number 2 is run your pre-sales business as a business. And then rule number 3 is delight and serve your customers. And we'll get into who your customers are a little bit later. So they were the 3 basic rules. And then we started thinking about it a little deeper, and we realized, rats, we forgot one basic rule, which is you actually have to manage yourself. And so if you can't be a good role model for your people, how are you going to lead them into battle, as it were? So we figured if people like Newton were allowed to have a 0th law of thermodynamics, we could have a 0 law of SE leadership. So that's where the 3+1 rule came in. So rule 0 is really manage yourself. The analogy I make around rule 0 is you kind of think of yourself. So you have James, right? And currently you're on James 3.0, right? That's your internal operating system. And you constantly need to improve your operating system, patch it, fix bugs. Extended analogy, people are constantly trying to hack you because they want your time and your resources, your money and everything else. Rule 0 is all about kind of managing yourself and what you do personally as a SE leader before you even get into all the other aspects you think about touching other people.
I like that. I just took a note. How have you seen the 3+1 rules of SE leadership in action?
You can see it where SEs will say, I will follow this person no matter where they go. If my boss calls me at 4 p.m. on a Friday and needs something done by Monday morning, I know it's important. I'm going to do it. They will provide air cover. Let's translate that. They'll get in the way of bureaucracy for me. They'll absorb some pain. Let me go out there and do things. They praise appropriately. They're always thinking about me and not about them. They use data to make business decisions and cut out a lot of the emotion. And they understand where the money comes from. And so that really is watching it in action. And it's kind of one of those things where when you see it, you know it. And I always say that the ultimate test is if, as a leader, you have a 1-hour meeting on your calendar tomorrow and it gets canceled, what are you going to do with that 1 hour? I mean, if there's something urgent and pressing you have to do for yourself, then do it. But otherwise, that 1 hour should be spent either developing and serving your people or running pre-sales as a business or serving your customers. Now, it shouldn't be done on extraneous noise stuff that doesn't contribute anything. So how people utilize and direct their time, I think, is the ultimate test of the 3+1 guidelines.
I like that a lot. And actually, a real life example that just happened to me this week is one of my employees recorded a demo and I asked him to send it to me. And he told me, well, you're never going to watch that. And I said, no, I actually watch 2, 3, 4 demos per week and I'll recap of feedback to my teams. And this guy was blown away. He just started working for me in a short period of time. And that's one of those challenges that if I have some free time on my calendar, it needs to be invested in my people because empowering my people is important to me. It's part of my viewed success, especially as a frontline leader in a big company like Salesforce. how well my people do is impactful to my performance.
Absolutely. And it says a lot to your credibility as well. Years ago, when I was an engineer, it's like 1982 or something, I went to this management training class in Oxford. And I remember nothing about it other than one acronym, which was DAYS, DAYS, which stands for Do As You Say. Mm-hmm. And to me, that embodies credibility and reliability, both as an SE and a leader and everything else. If you say, send it to me, I'm going to watch your demo, and then you actually do, not only does that individual know that word gets out, because SEs are incredibly good at, back channel chatter. DAYS is one of those mantras that's stuck in my brain now for, nearly 40 years.
Yeah, I like that. Well, leadership is about action, not words. And I think that is something that I've heard before, and it's a very good acronym. Let's talk about that first role, developing and serving your people. Tell us a little bit more about why you came up with this concept, and maybe let's dig a little bit deeper into the what of this concept.
Develop and serve your people. To me, that is the most important thing that you do as a leader or a manager, which is why it's rule number one. And the example we give in the book is, imagine that you're an SE director. Let's go up a level, and you have 40 people working for you. You can't do the job of those 40 people. But if you manage to find a way to make each one of those 40 people who work for you, either directly or indirectly, 5% more efficient, just that, suddenly you now have 2 extra SEs working for you effectively. Right. And that's the power of develop and serve your people. Whether it's freeing up time, whether it's giving them additional skills, giving them additional confidence, putting them in a place where they can succeed. Wrapping over the top of that is a concept that we call radar. As you probably figured out, John loves acronyms, right? And I love acronyms that actually inherently make sense. So radar is kind of forward-looking. It's also a warning system, and it stands for recruit, attract, develop, advance, and retain. So that's really the 5 stages of a life cycle that you go through as an SE working for somebody. So recruit is having a bench of people out there that you can go reach out to and bring in and potentially fill in headcount. And that's one of the most important jobs of any SE manager / leader is recruiting. I always tell first-line SEs, you just lock out 2-3 hours on your calendar every week just for that. Even if you are fat, dumb, and happy at 100% headcount, you still got to do it. Attract is once you find these people, what's your value proposition to bring them into your organization? Why should they come work for you? Then you have D, which is develop. So now they're working for you. What's your development plan to make them better? Then advance is not just the day-to-day tactical stuff, but the strategic areas in terms of promotion, bringing in additional skills, additional knowledge. And then R sits over everything, the final R, which is retain. So you always have to think about how are you going to retain these people? Or if you're going to let them go, where else are they going to land within your company where they'll be able to do good? Because you can't hang on to your rock stars, right? They're going to move on and do other things. And I think that is a measure of how good a boss you are if you just let those people go.
I agree. From a second, third, fourth line, in your opinion, does it change, or how does it change if you're a global VP running a 200 or 300 person org?
So your problems are bigger. And there's an expectation of a general level of competence for the people who are working for you. I mean, I know certainly as I moved up the ladder, I spent less and less time doing tactical things and more time reaching out to others in the organization outside of SE team. So it was really building relationships, cross-functional teams, not just with sales, but with marketing, product management, support, even finance and HR to get things done. Now, you still have to do some day-to-day management. You have your one-on-ones and everything else, but there's a lot more strategery, as one of my old bosses would call it, thinking ahead. Because honestly, whether you're a first-line SE leader or you're a VP of a 1,000-person organization, the only person who's seriously going to think about the strategic direction of your little part of the business is you. Now, it's not your boss's responsibility. It's not responsibility of the CEO or the COO. It's your responsibility. And you're in the best place to define it. And I think it's better that you as a leader define your future and your brand and where you're going rather than let other people do it for you.
Very well said. Question about radar then. When it comes to radar, do you feel like there's one aspect more so than others that leaders in general struggle with?
There's the R part, so the final R, which is the retain. There's a quote by one of the US presidents, Kennedy, says that the time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. which means that retention is a permanent thing that you do and not just when you think there is a problem. And people tend to be in a very reactive mode when they're thinking about retention rather than doing it proactively. Now, the great leaders, it's inherently just part of what they do. It's a habit, it's a behavior, and they don't consciously do it. They're constantly in retention mode and helping people. A lot of other people really have to struggle with it. So yeah, it's kind of at the tail end of the cycle, but really, as soon as somebody becomes an employee at Salesforce, for example, it is your job as a manager to make sure that they stay. And it's your job as a leader to make sure that they develop and advance.
Do you have any advice for leaders out there that are struggling with the retain aspect in their current role?
It really comes down to understanding what motivates your individual contributors, let's say, or your first and second line managers, depending on where you are. What makes people get up in the morning? If they're just coming to work for a job and the paycheck to pay the mortgage, then that's a different aspect than someone who just gets lit up about technology and solving problems and helping people both inside and outside the organization. Some SEs love to be recognized on stage in front of 1,000 people. Others are quite happy with just a pat on the back and, in the old days, a cup of coffee at the local coffee shop and you just to say thank you. Showing my generational gap, I guess. I used to send handwritten notes to their spouses and loved ones. Sorry I had Sandra work on Sunday afternoon. It was really important. Here's a $100 gift card. Please take your husband out for dinner next week. So it's just little things like that, kind of understanding what motivates people, because not everybody is like you. I always believe that one of the first things an SE leader should do, at least with their directs, is do some kind of behavioral or psychological profiling, as in DISC or strength finders, but do it in terms of how to make the team work better, or as I say in the book, how to make the boat go faster. So understanding people's differences and how to utilize people's differences to create the SE brand and then drive the organization forward from that.
I agree. And I should be a spokesperson for 16personalities.com. So if you're a leader out there, I used it the first week I came into my new job. It is really important to understand motivations and people to understand you and your style as well. I think
absolutely. And then it plays into the job as an SE. So we teach a very simplified version of DISC. So it's 4 buckets. It's not 16. And we do it with colors. So there's red, yellow, green, and blue. And then we teach SEs how to quickly profile or analyze their clients. So if you have a client who's, quote, blue, they are data-driven. No matter what you say and what you put up on a slide, you're going to have to give them documentation to prove your point. You have others who are red, they're on fire. So that's like the managing director of some Wall Street company. Time is money, give me the bottom line, bam, bam, bam. If you start chatting about last night's TV program, you're going to lose them. So we give SEs this framework, and managers should use it too, because it helps you understand how you can adapt to your employees or to your client. Because it's your job to do that. And it's not being inauthentic. It's actually being respectful of the way other people want to work.
It's customizing the customer experience. Customer centricity is what it's all about. One of the things that I keep telling people in the SE world, when you're going to a demo, a meeting, it's not about you. It's about your customer. And I think sometimes we have a hard time because our demo is our flow. It's our show. It's our time, but it's not about us. At the end of the day, we get paid if that customer buys.
I always tell the younger SEs, you are never the hero of the story. It's always your customer, your customer's customers, your customer's products who are the hero of the story. You can be the Yoda, you can be the Obi-Wan Kenobi, you are never the Luke Skywalker, to put it in storybook terms. And sometimes that's really hard for the younger SEs to grasp because they love their technology. They have such a passion about it. That's the way their enthusiasm comes out. It's not a bad thing. And you just harness the enthusiasm and channel it in a slightly different direction.
No, that's great, John. I like that. So how do you judge the success of a leader?
Well, there's immediate success and there's legacy success. So let's do legacy success first. So we have an interesting activity in our management workshops. We ask people to write down a list of their best bosses ever. Sometimes it's just one, quite often you'll get 4 or 5. And to me, if you're a successful leader, you end up on that list. I mean, maybe 10, 15, 20 years past, but you end up on that list. So that's your legacy, that people just think that's their vision. James, if someone who worked for you was in one of our workshops 10, 15 years from now, and they wrote down your name, you'd probably even never know about it, but that's your legacy and that's your brand. So it's something that you would never ever see. In terms of immediate tactical success, We talk about brand a lot. And Chris, my co-author, is really big on brand and servant leadership and things like that. So it's really, what do people say about you when you're not in the room? I mean, about you and about your team. If they say, wow, James is a real go-getting guy. His team is fantastic. They'll respond within reason to everything we do. They're adaptive. They never complain that much. They always come up with innovative solutions. The clients love them. Well, that's a great brand for an SE team, right? And that's your brand and the brand of your people. If when you're not in the room, the regional sales director complains to the VP and says, those SEs, all they do is find problems in my deals. They keep requalifying it. We never get anywhere. They're never done with discovery. They won't do demos. That's not a good brand to have because you're the department of no. So I think that's what makes a good leader is that when you're not around, people might ask, what would James do?
I love that. I really do. I like the department of no. That's broad. Because I think that there's a line of healthy friction that needs to exist, but too many times I think we let that go too far, right? We let that go too far.
Absolutely. Almost every sales process in the world has the concept of like red lights or red flags and yellow lights, yellow flags, things like that, which are warning symbols. None of them talk about green lights. That's one of the things we teach when we do business value discovery for sales engineers is you got to look at the good things as well. If a customer says, James, so it looks like your product is a great fit for us. If you're at the end of the sales cycle, you say, awesome, I do too, thank you. If you're at the start of the sales cycle, you say, awesome, I do too. Which particular pieces might most get your attention? And it's a discovery opportunity. And then you go tell the rep, right?
Right.
We're taught to dig for pain. And we also have to look for gain as well. And as SEs, we forget that sometimes, both internally and externally. And I think that's another job of a leader, not even a manager, is to look for the positives in life and not just to look for all the potential bad things that can happen.
I want to ask you a question. You talked about making the boat go faster a couple of times. Talk a little bit more about that concept.
The history behind that is the British rowing team, British rowing eights, were terrible in the late 1990s. And they wanted to go to the Sydney Olympics in Australia and win a medal 20 years ago. And so they just came up with this one basic strategy. And everything they did around training, boat design, diet, you name it, was does it make the boat go faster? And if the answer was no, then they didn't do it. And it was just the way that they streamlined themselves, their operations. And that's a great concept for an SE leader as well. If somebody asks you or your people to do something, and you ask yourself in your head, is this going to make the boat go faster? Now, how you define boat is the subject of a workshop, right? But if the answer is this is clearly not going to make the boat go faster, in fact, this is throwing oars out of the boat and putting a 50-ton weight in the back of it, then you probably don't want to do it. And so it's just a very simple, high-level look at time effectiveness and resource and process effectiveness and figuring out an hour from now, will I be happy that I did this? And there are many, many times in your life, and you could probably think about one even last week, James, where at the end of a meeting or at the end of a call or at the end of some task you took, you said, why am I doing this? It makes no sense. And so that is not making your boat go faster. And the ultimate end to the story is that the British rowing eights did indeed win a medal. So the strategy worked.
That's great.
And so I picked that up from them like 20 years ago. And anyone who's worked for me since the year 2001 will tell you that one of John's favorite questions is about the boat.
That's great. You get known for your sayings. That's what I've realized too. You definitely get known for your sayings.
Yeah, I think so. Good or bad.
Yeah, right. Last question from my perspective on this very topic, and it's actually influenced by Don Carmichael in a recent LinkedIn post. Did I miss anything on this subject that you think I should ask you about?
Yes, the famous closing question. Don and I chat about this a lot because we were on a podcast, I think, last year, and we were saying, what's a great closing question? And Don got in before me because that's what I wanted to do as well.
I haven't used it on the podcast yet, so this is the first time I'm using it on the podcast.
This is your first experiment. Metrics are important, and we're engineers. We love metrics, right?
We are.
Metrics can hammer down emotion if you're any good at selling.
Isn't that the truth right there?
Yes.
I've definitely enjoyed the conversation today. I've enjoyed getting to know you over the last couple of months, so it's been a fun process.
You're welcome. And thank you for all the work you do with the PreSales Collective. It's a wonderful thing, and all the different organizations around the world that are springing up to help improve the profession of pre-sales. That's something else that's changed over the last 20 years too. And it's awesome. Right. I'm glad I can contribute some small, tiny piece to the profession.
Well, you're one of the people who've really paved the way, so we owe it to you as well. So thank you. The last two questions I'd like to wrap with are two things that we ask everybody. And the first one is, what is your favorite thing about the pre-sales role?
We get to solve problems. No day is the same. You get to meet a lot of people, and it's just a fantastic job. If you are a pleaser and a solver of problems, I don't think there's any job in the world that's better than being an SE. And that's what used to light me up in the morning. And to some degree, it still does, because now I help people who solve problems. To me, that's the best thing about the role.
I agree with you. Last thing is, what advice do you have for people managers out there that are trying to get the most out of their employees?
Oh, turn your radar on.
Well said. Well said. Turn your radar on. John Care, thanks for your time again today. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you next time.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, James. You be safe now. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye. Wow. What an episode with John Care today. I hope you had fun and it was as impactful for you as it was for me. You can really see why John has been so successful in this profession for such a long time. A couple of the key takeaways today is that John loves acronyms, analogies, and sayings. I loved the examples that he used today. Two of my favorites were, we're taught to dig for pain, but we should be looking for gain, and don't be in the department of no. I think that's really big, and that's really critical for success of teams. Turn your radar on. That radar acronym is fantastic. Learn it, understand it, utilize it, and really empower your people. I love the analogy with tennis around leading and managing as both important skills toward leadership. And also, John gave us a lot of good recommendations on books, including the Sales Engineering Manager's Handbook, which just came out. So definitely add that to your reading list. Okay, pre-sales community, thanks for listening. If you haven't yet, please sign up for our Slack community, follow us on our LinkedIn page, and join one of our upcoming amazing webinars. We'll see you on the next episode.